Hello YouTube, I hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to take a look at the short story Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. It's considered by many one of the best short stories. In fact, the novel is also, as the data is a follow-up, it's also considered one of the best novels in science fiction. Now today I'm looking exclusively at Daniel Keyes' short story. I'm not considering his novel for purposes of this review. I do think that they're distinctly different enough that they really should have two separate reviews. And I'm not going to be doing a novel for a while because I think the short story is the better version of this story. It has somebody who's, but I enjoy them both, but I do think that it's better as a short story than as a novel. I've also felt the same way, by the way, for Nightfall. I reviewed for you both Nightfall by Isaac Asimov's short story, and then later on the expansion that was done by Robert Silverberg, and the short story is just so much better. So we're going to be looking at this from this collection that I have here. This is the Science Fiction Hall of Fame's book. Basically what this book does is it puts together all the short stories from the early era of science fiction up through the mid-60s that were considered some of the best by writers of the science fiction writers of America, which is basically a guild of writers and other people that publish science fiction. So these are the people that are on the front lines that are making this stuff, editing this stuff, and so forth. And these are their considerations for the best stories of all time. And they basically voted on about 20 stories. And the top 20 stories of all time are here, plus they added a few other ones by some classic authors and so forth. And so the short story Flowers for Algernon hits all the way up at number 3 on this. Only 2 short stories, A Nightfall by Isaac Asimov is one of them, is going to hit higher than this, and A Martian Odyssey by Stanley Greenbaum is the other one that hits higher than Flowers for Algernon. But they consider Flowers for Algernon to be one of the best examples of a science fiction short story, and incidentally so do I. I consider it probably one of my own top 10 science fiction short stories too. So what we'll do is take a look at it right now. Now the guy who wrote up Daniel Keyes did not write a lot of things. This is actually one of his first short stories that he's going to write. And he's actually approached by a science fiction magazine to publish some stories and such that he had already reached out to. And he actually wrote the original story that's published, that we know very well today, sent it out, and they said, this is a good short story, except we don't like the ending. We want to change the ending to be a more happy ending, and so forth, and less of it. And so he's like, nope, the ending is what makes this story, and I would agree with that so much. And so he kept true to that, and he actually published in a less reputable place in order to publish it where he thought was best suited. But it was hugely well received, reprinted multiple times over the next couple of years, won a Hugo Award for best short story that year too. So it's, people said this is a great short story, and they were absolutely right. He was well received at the time too, and he was dead on, and he was an early writer. I mean, he could have said, hey, look, maybe the editors know better. It's a higher profile magazine. I'll just, change the ending and we'll just move on. But he didn't. He stood to his grounds famously, and he was right. The story is so much better because of its ending and such. So it's very interesting. Daniel Keyes also won't follow this up with a lot of big stuff. His novel, he'll do a few years later, and that's pretty much it. He won't really do a whole lot of stuff for a while. He will publish a few other novels after he starts to work together on his craft. Some of his things actually will be pretty good later on. He'll do some stuff in the 80s, for example, and some stuff too. But he's not a writer who's published a lot of stuff. But instead, the stuff that he's published are things that we know very well. In fact, many people would consider Flowers for Algernon one of their favorite novels of all time. And many people would consider Flowers for Algernon a short story, one of their favorite short stories of all time. So again, we'll take a look at the short story, again, which I think is a little bit better. Now, he was writing this for a long time. He actually was a teacher. And so he came to this as a teacher and so forth, and he saw some of his own folks that he was working on that may have had learning disabilities and so forth in his classrooms that he was teaching and such, and how how their interactions with other students and their own learning methods would change based on what they were learning, or based on who they were learning it with, their surrounding community, or whether they were accepting of them or not, and so forth. And he said that it was actually very heartbreaking, some of the things that he saw, these people that would come back after going back up to a bigger classroom and then being bullied or something like that, or teased because they were being stupid and such, or similarly having their own material to learn and how they actually would regress. He said it was very heartbreaking and so forth. But he was developing this story over time, and he actually does the story of Flowers for Algernon. And so I'm not sure 100% how to review Flowers for Algernon. My base assumption is that most people have at least read the novel. Because there's a novel, there's a plays, there's short stories, there's movies, I mean, this story is so well known. So what I'm going to do is unlike most of my reviews where I'm going to stop at the end about halfway through or a third of the way through or something like that with my review, and then stop for spoiler-based purposes. Instead, I'm just going to give you a spoiler tag that I'm going to write here into the video, and I'm actually going to give you the full synopsis, but not massively. But I do think it's important. I do think, again, he stuck his guns for the ending, and I think most people out there are probably going to know the ending for the story anyway. But basically, what's going to end up happening in Flowers for Algernon is, and we're going to read this from the first-person account of a gentleman named Charlie. And Charlie is going to be this very loyal, nice person who's a janitor. He has a very low intelligence. His score of intelligence is, I think, 68. And so he's a very low intelligence, and so as a result, he's just a janitor at a factory and so forth. He believes he has some friends there and so forth, and he is selected as the person who will undergo sort of the first human experiment in this trial to increase a person's intelligence. Now, the surgery has already been done for a mouse whose name is Algernon, and Algernon's intelligence has already at least doubled in size since it's been done. Since it's been done successfully on a mouse, they're now going to move to human trials, and Charlie has chosen volunteers for this experiment, so he's going to undergo it. And it seems to be a success, and slowly over time, his intelligence is starting to increase. And so you're going to see this actually in the way that he's writing. His manners of speech are going to improve, and so on and so forth. The person who's leading the experiment is a female nurse, and so forth. They're going to become very close friends, and she's going to kind of lead him through kind of the experiments, what's happening, and so forth. One of the things he's going to realize very quickly when he goes back to work is that the people at work were just kind of teasing him behind his back and so forth, and so they're now very uncomfortable with him. They try to get him fired with the boss and so forth, and tired of the whole thing, he just decides to quit. So he quits his factory and so forth, so rather than have people talk about him behind his back and such, and realizing now that he's, much smarter than many of the people that used to tease him about being dumb are, he just no longer feels that that's an appropriate place. Then what ends up happening is they find out that Algernon's intelligence has actually started to diminish, and very soon after he's going to die. And so seeing that this effect is probably going to be temporary for Charlie as well, Charlie begins to do some explorations of the scientific method, because his intellectual abilities have grown to the point where he's now able to understand strong sort of scientific properties and such. So he's going to spend most of the rest of the time of his high level of intelligence kind of exploring the nature of the tests, of the study, of the science, and fixing it and so forth, so that for the future people it won't be an issue. And then slowly he'll degrade back down into his stupid level. He'll try to get his old job back, but he'll ultimately decide that he decides to leave, and in fact the entire area. And he'll actually, his last request is that somebody continues to leave flowers on Algernon's grave. Sorry, it teared me up a little bit. It's a good story. Anyway, it's a strong story, and without having the end at the end. Again, the editor who wrote it said, hey, look, we want you to have the happy ending. We want you to have him, keeping his intelligence, getting married to the nurse whom he has developing feelings for, and so forth, and have that sort of a happy ending to it. But that's not the story. That doesn't make, the story is such much a stronger story when the intelligence fades and you see what ends up happening to Charlie and his life and his people and so forth. The story is much stronger for that. And so again, I think Keyes did a very, very good job with that. Now, again, Keyes is also going to turn this into a novel, and it's a popular novel. Many people may have actually read the novel for classes, for English classes, and so forth. It's a very strong story. So again, I do consider it it's so well written from the first person. It's also such a great example of a first person narrative story with a person who keeps a journal. So you're reading that person's journal from the beginning to middle to end. You're seeing the grammar of that person change. You're seeing the style of writing of that person change. You're seeing the emotions of that person change, and so forth. And ultimately, he just can't deal with all the issue and the angers and all the other things. So he just wants to go someplace and start over from completely fresh, where people won't have known that he was smart or anything else like that either. So again, it's a strong story, and I think that Keyes hit it out of the park as one of his first stories. And again, he's really going to, I think, really kind of make, this is going to be the definitive work of Keyes' career out of a very short writing career. Now, he's going to actually teach creative writing. He actually teaches it at Wayne State University for several decades. I was actually at Wayne State University. It's in Detroit. If you're not familiar with it, it's actually the third of the three Research One public schools in Michigan. The first are Michigan State and University of Michigan, and Wayne State has about 30,000 people in the heart of Detroit. And I actually worked there for about 3 or 4 years, about 10 years ago or so. So I'm very familiar with the area, with the institution, and so forth. And in fact, under Keyes, there were many famous science fiction, fantasy, horror writers, and so forth who would go there to explore creative writing. For example, one of those was Thomas Ligotti, who's famous, as famous as one of the strong, probably the strongest horror writer, in my opinion, of the last 40 years. It's not the novelist Stephen King or somebody else like that. I would say Ligotti's probably the strongest horror writer of the last 30, 40 years. He wrote a lot of his stuff in the late 70s and early 80s, and so forth, and it's incredibly strong, and there's a reason why he's in a Penguin Classic. And he's very, very early in his life, because he's just such a strong writer. And he actually was one of people who went to Wayne State University, studied at Wayne State University under Keyes. And so forth. So I would consider him, I don't know if Keyes and himself, but you know, hey, if you're bringing him to him, I would consider that to be a win for Keyes and his reputation and his teaching and his creative writing abilities and such. So anyway, so Keyes will become, you know, he started out as a teacher, remember? He wrote on the side and so forth, so he'll remain a teacher. He'll just move up from like elementary school to colleges and such. But he's a teacher, that's who he is, and that's fine, I appreciate that, and so forth. So this is Keyes' short story, Flowers for Algernon. Again, it was voted as the third short story of all time. I'm sure most of you have either read the novel or the short story or both, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about the story below if you agree with me or disagree with me. Again, I agree with the rating. I think it's one of the 10 strongest short stories ever written. I also think the short story is better than the novel. Do you agree or disagree with those things? I'm happy to talk with you about any of these points or more down below in the comments below, and happy to engage you on those. And hey, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, because we all have busy days. We all have busy lives. So the fact that you spent some time with me, hey, I really do appreciate that. So thanks again. Have a good one.